Hello everyone. Like I said, I'm Dave Lovatt. I'm a Director of Research and Development for Disability Solutions West Midlands. We are a small charity based in Stoke-on-Trent. I'm going to tell you today about basically how our journey started through GDPR and the kind of things we came across and the kind of problems we came up against. So first, Disability Solutions, who are we? We are a small local charity based in Stoke-on-Trent who help people with disabilities, long-term health conditions, and including cancer. Basically, we help people to find solutions for the problems they have. Most of what we do has a legal basis. So we do a lot of appeals and tribunal work, which involve obviously the courts, judges and that kind of thing, medical reports and so on and so forth. So a lot of what we do is highly sensitive information and basically need to be protected to the best of our ability. So, just this year alone, the financial year, over 8,300 clients, 24,000 contacts, but as you can see there, 561 appeals and tribunals. So like I said previously, that's a lot of sensitive information. So the highly confidential nature of the data we obtain, process and store meant we had to ensure we considered every possible area when it came to GDPR. Sorry, just going through my notes here. While ensure we didn't overlook anything, because obviously a slip up could cost us massively. So we had to really be careful. So to do that, basically, I became GDPR. My life became GDPR. So overall, basically, I spent 15,000 hours reading, 3 to 6 months of research, to the point where I think the wife forgot what I looked like. Basically, I've got 7 box files back at the office, which are just full of pure research around GDPR. I attended multiple information events, and I also spoke with the ICO. However, when I contacted the ICO, it took me 6 months to get a response. That's how busy they were with general inquiries. I also spoke to the National Association of Solicitors, and even they weren't sure on GDPR or where we all stood. So 3 years in total was spent researching before we actually developed the processes we needed. But one thing I found is no one was 100% sure on what GDPR was. And it was a puzzle that everyone was trying to put together themselves piece by piece. So after the research, I decided to start, I would firstly start to look at the kind of data that we processed every day. So we had the kind of data such as medical records, x-rays, bank details. So I assessed all the data we had from top to bottom and asked myself, why do we have it? Where is the data? Where does it go? How is it used? Why is it used? And so on. So I had to ask a lot of questions, including talking to all the managers in the organisation and the teams. Along with my fellow board members, I prepared the ground for the audit, which for me was the first point of our GDPR journey. Now, the audit was a big piece of work. Now, overall, the audit took about 6 to 8 months just to do. That was to ensure we covered every area. So the audit itself, we looked at a few areas. As you can see there is, if memory serves, yes, 6 audits in total. Now, all these audits did have a common idea. Yes, my words have gone. So they all had interlinking themes, but yet they were all necessary. So we had a general full audit, a data audit, a data risk and prevention audit, an IT assets audit, an information audit, and a software audit. Now, like I say, there was a lot of interlinking properties and a lot of repetitive work involved, but it was all necessary for what we needed to do. Now, the audit looked like that. That's part of what it looked like on the wall in the meeting room. Basically, for 6 months, I lived in the meeting room at the organisation, and I decorated it with my own personal wallpaper. Now, with that being said, the audit had to look at things like not only what the data is we've got, but who accessed it, what the risks were, how to mitigate them risks, what were the direct risks, what were the indirect risks, and so on and so forth. So it was a multitude of different areas I had to assess. Now, being a small charity, there was difficulties that we had that potentially other organisations wouldn't have when it came to GDPR. Now, things like resource and cost was a big thing for us, because as a small charity, we rely on funding from other organisations like local authorities, NHS. So So we had to make sure that becoming GDPR compliant wasn't going to bankrupt us. It did, or make us, make things more difficult. Along with that, we have 45 volunteers and new volunteers starting every day. So having to speak to everyone, new volunteers every day to tell them how important GDPR was and what we were doing to become GDPR compliant. Some staff didn't think GDPR applied to us because we were such a small charity. Communicating with the staff to ensure transparency was a difficulty because some staff didn't really understand GDPR and also didn't see the point of GDPR. The workforce accepting additional procedures that they must undertake, that was a difficulty, and ensuring all systems interlinked and all the areas were covered. I've got Brexit on there because, funnily enough, a lot of the staff thought that Brexit applied to GDPR. A lot of the staff were convinced that once we left Europe, GDPR would no longer exist. Now, telling them that this wasn't the case took a lot of time, and explaining to them that GDPR is now here forever. Regardless of how it sits within the government, with Europe and what have you, GDPR is with us now until the end of time, no matter whether we like it or not at the end of the day. So having to sit people down, like I say, and talk to them about it took a lot of time. So the things the workforce found difficult, now although some of these things sound quite common, keep in mind what we do has a high level of sensitivity. So clients come to us, they're starving, they're homeless, their disability is so severe they don't leave the house. So our staff want a streamlined workflow that helps them to help that client as quick as possible. So to them, additional things like increased password complexity with changes, two-factor authentication, automatic log-off when they leave the computer, no access to work systems outside of the office, restricted access to areas unnecessary to their roles, and for some reason a clear desk policy, which they all hated. To them, these were just things that slowed down them helping people who really needed the help. Because their argument was, we are secure now, so what is the point? Why do we have to worry now if we're already secure? Now, having to highlight the need for the ever-changing landscape of data protection and data security and the advances in cyber threats, as we're all aware of, every day things advance further and further, was a big part of the journey we took. Not just making them aware, but helping them to understand the necessary things we must do. It's down there. I've just noticed it's down there. So the biggest thing I found with GDPR was the human element. Now, for me, this is the biggest piece of the puzzle. You can have all the policies in the world, all the processes, all the pieces of software, all the gadgets and gizmos, but at the end of the day, the person is central to being compliant. So the human element does add an additional layer to be considered, and it became a big part of our journey. We have 17 staff, but 45 volunteers. So ensuring they were all appropriately trained and aware of GDPR took a lot of doing, and so they were aware of the processes and the challenges at points. People don't like change. They don't like unfamiliar systems, and they especially don't like having to worry about forgetting things. So this is certainly a difficult part of the journey, and it was for us. I lost count of how many individual and group conversations I had to have, as well as official meetings around GDPR with our staff. You can have all the systems in place, but at the end of the day, the staff member and the volunteer is a main component. All humans, as humans, we make a mistake. Not on purpose, hopefully, but we do. We don't mean to, but at times it does happen. So no matter the system or level of security in place, it always needs a human being in the driving seat. So for us, that was a big part. So to address this, we basically flooded them all with training. Training. To mitigate the risk of the human element as much as possible, we trained the workforce within an inch of their lives. 6 sessions, each 5 hours long. So we asked the workforce, you must attend 2 sessions of training. After that, show us that you understand the changes, show us you understand the processes, and then put that into practice. This helped us to mitigate the risks. Because of the level of information we use, there's a lot of risks, because if someone's medical records leak out or someone's bank details leak out, the effects on them personally is astronomical, not just on the charity's reputation and then any work we do moving forward. Now, in that case, some of the volunteers found our processes to be very difficult. Now, because some of them maybe weren't as IT trained as they were, so we spent a lot of time individually training volunteers. With it being a disability charity, nearly all of our volunteers have a disability. Now, the good thing is, I've never seen such a bunch of volunteers so committed to learning something new as they were. Our staff were committed, but the volunteers, a different level. Because at the end of the day, they don't get paid, but they were so committed to helping the charity move forward. At the end of the day, we all want to make sure that Mr. Smith and Mrs. James had food, had a roof, had the money they needed to meet their care needs. So for us, the GDPR was huge. We had to get to that end point. So our compliance, after developing policies and so on and so forth, developed into an overall looking like this. This is a small list. This isn't everything, because obviously if it was everything, we'd be here for about 3 or 4 days. So we have things like 50 new policies, 3 influential documents that are basically a living document, so they alter and change every day because things get added or taken away. We have additional security protocols, a data risk register, a continued living data audit that changes every day. I can't turn my page, hang on. There we go. And then obviously we train our staff and volunteers every quarter. With having new volunteers every week, sometimes once a month, sometime this week alone, I've had 8 new volunteers. So when I go back tomorrow, training session, 1 this week, 1 next week. Every day we're having to ensure we meet our compliance needs. So, at the end, hang on, I've lost train of thought, give me a second. So for us, the journey never ends. It's always advancing further and further. Now, one thing that our new systems helped us to flag up, which was actually really interesting, was we had 12 data subject access requests. We had 2 right to be forgottens and 8 data access requests the week of GDPR. Fortunately enough, 4 months before GDPR came in, a client came to us and said to us, I want to be erased, I want to be forgotten. That was wonderful, because it gave me the chance to then test the procedures I'd developed before making them live. And fortunately enough, they showed to work. So the client doing that, inadvertently, they did us a massive favour. But one thing our new policies and systems helped us to see was that Her Majesty's Court and Tribunal Service and the DWP, they make a lot of data mistakes. They send our clients' information to other ends of the country. They send other people's clients' information, so other organisations, to us. So obviously, I keep a record of all of that, because even though it's not our mistake, I want to make sure we are covered. So back at the office, I have a file with all near misses in, whether it's our near miss or their near miss. Luckily enough, touch wood, we haven't had any near misses, he says, pushing his luck, or anything desperate. But we've had quite a few off the DWP and off the Tribunal Service, where they'll send someone's information to the wrong place, or they'll even ring up, speak to someone, and then without asking any security questions, start telling that person about the client, which is horrendous, because if that was my data, I'd be losing my mind. So that was basically what it helped us to find out. Along with Disability Solutions, I also work with North West Medical Institute, the Green Door Charity, Multiple and Complex Needs and Abilities Club, and also Bentley's Caterers. So quite an eclectic mix there of people that have helped become GDPR compliant. But one thing I'll never say is we'll never be 100% GDPR, because there's no such thing as being 100% GDPR compliant, because you're always learning, you're always adapting, you're always changing, whether it be more staff, whether it be new systems at the end of the day. Now, I may have rushed through this a little bit, but I think I'm doing okay. So in conclusion, really, the journey was a difficult one, but I think it was well worth it. We are very happy that we undertook GDPR. With all the panicking that there was at the start, everyone didn't know. Solicitors' firms didn't know, even the experts didn't know. The ICO, from what I can remember on their website, had documents that they hadn't released yet, and they weren't actually sure when they were going to release them, because even they weren't sure of all the elements of GDPR. So it's a long road to travel, and it's a lot of research and a lot of commitment. Now, unfortunately, I haven't really got a life outside of work, so I was fortunate in that I literally jumped into GDPR and it became everything. Because to me, the charity's existence is central. So for me, GDPR was worth it. The hardest part of the journey is done for us, but every day there'll be a new challenge. A new cyber threat will come around, a new volunteer, a new staff member, a new piece of data maybe, or a client with additional needs. Because obviously we're having clients with severe mental health issues. They can be very protective of their data. So the fact that we can say to our clients, we are GDPR compliant to the best of our ability, goes a long way. Because at the end of the day, they've been through a system where they may have been treated unfairly. So when they come to us, they know that they're safe, we're there to help them, but most of all, their data is safe. So we're fortunate. And like I said before, we got to live test some of the stuff we did before we actually did it. So it was a lesson. It was a hard lesson to learn, but a lesson nonetheless. Some of our volunteers can't quite accept GDPR at the moment. Luckily, there was one staff member who would not accept GDPR, thought it was overkill, complete overkill. But then he said that he was going to retire, and I was so thankful for that. He was a great bloke, don't get me wrong, great bloke, but he just didn't see the point of GDPR. He thought it was all overkill. No matter how much I said to him, if this was your data, how would you want it looked after? He didn't see the need for it. He thought it was all absolute cobble at the end of the day. But like I said, he retired. My life became a lot easier. So we have, like I said, we have new policies, new procedures, new systems, and that's basically the lesson we learned. And that's kind of all I've kind of got to say, I suppose. Well, but one thing I could say is what I did learn is to audit, analyse, develop, train, and watch out for the human, because they are your biggest risk factor, and not on purpose, just because, like I say, we all make mistakes. So that's me done. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate that. Any questions from the floor for Dave? Any arms?
Hi, just wondered, with the group that you work for and also other groups that you've worked with, how did you approach either insourcing a data protection officer or potentially outsourcing that, and who it would be?
Right. So in terms of the data protection officer, into the Disability Solutions, I'm the data protection officer for them. In terms of the organisations I work for, I help to train a relevant person within that organisation. None of the organisations I work for wanted to outsource. They wanted to keep it as in-house as possible, which is understandable, really, when you're working with that kind of information. So it was basically, I spent, I think it was 12 months incrementally training relevant people for the organisations I work for, helping to train, and then helping them to I consulted along the way to help them to build their processes and help the person sort of understand. And then, luckily, Stuart, for example, he's come on leaps and bounds. He probably knows more about GDPR than I do now, because he lives in it even today. So I did that, kept them all in-house and trained them that way. That was the best thing for us at the end of the day.
So, first of all, congratulations on the Team Cap buckle. I was also Team Cap. Secondly, we have a lot of people sort of go, oh, GDPR and all that kind of stuff. On a sort of scale of 1 to 10, how confident were you in your security certainty before GDPR, and how much more confident are you today after doing all this work?
Okay. So without being too, shall we say, overconfident, I'd say when I got Disability Solutions, before I started, when my role first started, I'd say about a 6. After I've been in post for about 6 to 12 months, I'd say an 8. With GDPR, Stuart from ProBank came along the other week, did a questionnaire, I'd say a 10. And that's because the information that I've learned through the question I did with Stuart and the other gentleman that was there, they said to me that actually they hadn't seen a score quite that high before, so I was quite proud of that one. I was quite smug. Honest with you, I was really quite smug about it. So, but that's really important to me, the security part. Like I say, it's not our data we play with, it's our clients' data, and they're already going through a tough time as it is, so making sure that their information was safe was paramount. So yeah, I'd say a 10 now for definite.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for that.